Do you know our legacy? In the time where heroes lived, people like Salahuddin, who gave his life for Islam, our legacy.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All praise belongs to Allah, and may His peace and blessings be upon His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Welcome to today's episode, inshallah, where we're looking at Islamic history. Today, inshallah, we are going to be looking at the history of Islam in the Philippines. Now, I'm sure many people, when I talk about Islam in the Philippines, a common response I get is, are there Muslims in the Philippines?
Are there?
Are there Muslims? Has anyone heard of Islam in the Philippines?
You would say for
up
us.
until now, I think the south is pretty much a predominant region where Islam is affiliated
Sulu
with.
or something like that.
So we've heard some rumors. Maybe there's
Not
some
rumors.
Muslims in the Philippines.
It's
What
a
about
big
the
country, about 90 million or 100.
Approximately 80
Well,
million or so. Now, I want to give you a number. 490. 490 years. Could you imagine how long 490 years is? This is almost half a millennium. This is almost 5 centuries. This is a very long time, we would agree. The Muslims in Mindanao, the Muslims in the southern Philippines, have been fighting for their freedom for 490 years. When we talk about, for example, Afghanistan, we're talking about 10 years. Iraq, even less. Palestine, we're looking at maybe 60 years.
That's 400.
Mindanao,
Who are they
490 years. I'm not going to blame anyone, but this is shameful that we as Muslims are not aware of the situation of our brothers and sisters in the Philippines. The history of Islam in the Philippines is very vast. We're going to be looking at all of this today, inshallah.
Is it true that it's the first monotheistic religion in the Philippines?
First, in what sense?
The Islam. Is it the first monotheistic religion?
When you
And,
say first, in what sense though?
like the oldest.
It was the first monotheistic religion to enter into the Philippines, correct. So we're going to be looking at this, inshallah. So the Philippines, we already know Muslims have been there for 490 years at least, engaged in fighting
And
for their
they
freedom.
still fighting, or it's all
Until today.
until today?
This is the longest jihad being fought in the whole Muslim world.
So in which country exactly Islam came to Philippines?
What we're going to do is we'll look at how Islam first entered into the Philippines. So the Philippines, for those who don't know, it's a group of islands. There are 3 main groups of islands. You've got Luzon in the north, the Visayas in the middle, and Mindanao in the south. Now the location of them is there just above Borneo, which is part of Malaysia, and it's below Taiwan and Japan. So it's over in the Pacific. So it's to the edge of the Pacific, very close to the date line. This is the Philippines. Now, the way that Islam first entered here, Islam began to spread through all of Southeast Asia, which we're going to be looking at in another episode, inshallah. We found that Malaysia was embracing Islam, Indonesia, Brunei, all of these lands. Until there was a Muslim, his name was Karim al-Makhdoom. Karim al-Makhdoom was the first one to bring Islam into what we know today to be the Philippines. And he went to an island which is called Tawi-Tawi. Now, Tawi-Tawi, it sounds a little bit funny. It actually comes from the word Jawi. Jawi in Malay, it means very far away. Like you got Masjid Al-Aqsa, the furthest masjid. Jawi means
west.
far away. So when you say Jawi, it means very far away.
Far
away.
Far away.
Is this Tagalog we're speaking?
No, this is not Tagalog. This is in Malay.
His name is Qadi al-Makhtoum.
Karim al-Makhdoom.
Karim.
Karim al-Makhdoom. And he landed in the island of Tawi-Tawi.
Was
And
he a Sahabi?
No, he was not a Sahabi. This is in the year 1380.
Before the 490 years, you said that they were...
Yes, this is before those 490 years. Now we're going back to the year 1380.
Was his intention to go spread Islam to the Philippines, or was
Islam was spreading all throughout Southeast Asia. So he went to Tawi-Tawi with the intention of converting the people. And in Tawi-Tawi, there's a place called Simunul. And he landed in Simunul and he built the first masjid. And it's still there today, the Masjid of Karim al-Makhtoum. in Simonol.
So they have the oldest masjid. It survived. It survived, but they're floating above four
Yes, it's still there today.
100 years, and they have that masjid.
It's still there today. You can still go visit. It's bigger than the original one. Has been expanded, but it's still there today. So we see around, the 1200s, Islam was spreading all throughout Southeast Asia. Now it's entered into the Philippines. So Mindanao is the main southern island of the Philippines. As we said, you can sort of break up the Philippines into three main bits: Luzon, the Visayas, and Mindanao. So Mindanao, Islam started to spread through here, the Sulu Peninsula, and into the mainland of Mindanao. Almost all of Mindanao embraced Islam.
Without fighting.
This is no fighting, nothing. This is just peaceful, like a missionary da'wah,
Or
people
through
going.
trade as well, perhaps.
Of course they were trading with the Malays at the time, because you'll see the Filipino language, especially in Mindanao, the language they speak, like Mindanao, Tausug, all of these, it's very similar to Malay. If someone especially speaks Tausug, you can almost understand the Malay language. They're very, very similar culture. So they did have a lot of trades. So this was one of the ways that Islam spread.
So at that time, what was the main religion
there? The majority of the people at the time, they were what we call animist. They didn't really have any religion. They used to worship many gods, polytheists. They'd worship the sun. They'd say Araw. They would worship the sun. They'd worship the tree. They'd probably worship fish. Anything.
Their forefathers.
Anything like this.
Islam go to these countries without a sword.
Without a sword. All
Without
through
blood.
da'wah. All through da'wah. And the people started to embrace Islam very quickly. Islam started to spread throughout the islands, all throughout the Visayas, until it reached Manila. Manila, which we know now the capital of the Philippines, it was actually founded by a Muslim.
Really?
It was founded by a Muslim. So Manila was Muslim for quite a long time. The ruler of Manila, which we'll talk about later, his name is Raja Sulaiman.
So the ruler of in the past, the capital of Philippines was Muslim capital, was a Muslim city.
Well, the Philippines as a country only came about recently, but Manila at that time was one of the main cities. But
It was a Muslim city, or just founded by Muslims?
Founded by Muslims, and the majority of the people living there were Muslims.
And where are that Muslims nowadays? Now, where
This
they?
is what we're going to talk about, inshallah.
How did it really spread, the religion?
It spread through da'wah. People would, you'd go, like Islam came to Tawi, they travel to the next islands. They tell the people, worship Allah, God is one, believe in this, don't worship, many gods. Very, very simple. The message of Islam, this is how generally it spreads. The main message of Islam, that God is one. Very, very simple. And the Filipino people accepted this very easily. So things were going good up until the year 1521. Now, 1521.
When Magellan came to Philippines?
Yes. Now, we know there was a very famous explorer. His name was Ferdinand Magellan. Maybe some of us have heard his name before. What happened was he was from Portugal, and he worked for the King and Queen of Spain. And one of his jobs was to go around to different islands around the world, and he was actually looking for what we call the Spice Islands, which is, to the south of the Philippines, Indonesia, where you could go.
I think you're talking about the Celebes Islands, is it? The Celebes? The Celebes Islands, I think,
Around these
around
islands,
the
yes.
Sulawesi, Makassar, that area there, I think.
This is what he was looking for.
Right.
But he got lost and he ended up in the Philippines.
Okay.
Now, he landed at an island, which is called Mactan Island. Mactan Island, it's right next to one of the major cities of today. It's called Cebu. So you can actually go to Mactan Island. When you fly to Cebu, the airport is on Mactan Island. Now, the ruler of Mactan Island was a Muslim. His name was Khalifa Lapu. Now, later on, the Filipinos, they corrupted his name to Lapu Lapu. You see, like Tawi Tawi, Lapu Lapu. They love to repeat words. So Khalifa Lapu,
Like maybe Musa?
it could be. But I like Musa much better. So what happened was Magellan landed in Mactan Islands. Now, what had happened at that time, Magellan's crew, they were actually the first crew to travel around the world. They actually circumnavigated the whole globe. This is why Magellan is very famous.
To prove that the Earth is round, because in Europe they thought that it's like a plate.
This was a theory. Many people knew that it wasn't true, but Magellan physically proved that it's true. He sailed around the whole world. He was
So
the first person to do
This
this.
was after that, and now he's looking for spices.
Yes. So after all of this, looking for the Spice Islands, he landed in Mactan Island. Now, when he landed there, he didn't just go as an explorer. Because we know he explored, he was looking for spices. But in reality, you have to remember, he's working for the king and queen of Spain. This is not long after the fall of Andalus. He came with a very anti-Muslim sentiment. And he came as almost as a crusader, if you like. So one of the first things he did when he landed in Mactan Islands is he brought a cross. And he planted this cross. And he said, you know, in the name of the king and queen of Spain, this is now Christian land.
And he find the Muslims. He say, Muslims once again.
No, so he found these Muslims. And so he approached the Muslims and he said to them, you know, become Christian. And they said, we'll never become Christian. You're welcome in our land, but we're never going to become Christian. You should become Muslim. So what happened was Magellan, he realized that, you know, things aren't going to go well. So he went to, he found there was another ruler. His name was Raja Humabon.
So even though Christianity came before Islam, in the Philippines, did Islam reach the Philippines before Christianity did?
Yes, the Muslims were there. As we said, the Muslims were in the Philippines. Magellan was the first Christian to land in the Philippines. So he's landed, he's brought his cross, wants to convert the Muslims. The Muslims say, no, thank you. So what happened was he went to another king.
Was Muslim?
This king, his name was Raja. Raja, it means king, Humabon. And he wasn't a Muslim. He was like an idol worshipper.
Well, that's the reason why he went to him.
Of course, he went to him. Now Magellan said to him, become Christian and I'll help you fight your enemy. Who was his enemy? Khalifa Lapu.
Muslim.
The Muslim. So he said to Raja Humabon, convert to Christianity and I'll help you fight your enemy. So he thought about it and he said, you know what? I wouldn't mind defeating him. This sounds like a good idea. It works out well for me. So he became a Christian and they changed his name from Humabon to Carlos. Because that was the name of the Spanish king at the time.
We can conclude that Islam came with a peace and Christianity came with a war.
We'll discuss this in a little bit more detail, just so we can actually show the proof and the evidence for this.
The same old plan.
The same?
Old plan. The plan that they come
we see this happening time and time again. So Raja Humabon or now Carlos, as they called him, and Magellan, they made a deal. They made a pact. Now the pact that they would have, they would call it Sandugo. Sandugo. Now what Sandugo is they would get a cup of wine. They would cut themselves and they would bleed into the cup. So you've got wine and the blood of Magellan and the blood of Humabon. And then they both drank this. The Sandugo is called a blood pact. This means we're allies.
And what this will do?
It's like a symbolic gesture. You know, why you have to do such a thing, I've got no idea. But it just shows, you know, the bestial thoughts of these people. It's something very, very strange. So they did this Sanduga. They both bled into the cup of wine and they drank it. And they said, now we're going to fight together against the Muslims.
Barbaric.
It sounds very barbaric. But what they did after, of course, is more barbaric. So what happened was, you know, this new Christian army, you know, the Muslim, we won't call them Filipinos because they didn't exist, but they usually call them Indios, you know, the Indians of the Philippines. So the natives.
They called them Indians too.
They called them Indians. like
so there's
like
Indians,
Columbus,
there's Indians in India, there's Indians in America, and there's Indians in the Philippines.
All because the Spanish don't know what an Indian is. They end up calling everyone the Indians.
And the Magellanos have an army with him.
He had his own army, of course. They brought weapons. They came to fight. So what happened was the Christian army, led by Magellan, they came to the Muslims, led by Khalifa Lapu. And Khalifa Lapu, he was there on Mactan Island, and the Muslims, they realized, you know, these people are coming to fight. So they started to prepare some traps around the islands. And they were thinking, you know, they were ready to fight that day, but the Christians, they held back. They kept their ship just, you know, a little bit far away, you know, far enough that the Muslims can't attack them, but far enough to intimidate them. So the Muslims were waiting. They were ready for the battle. Lapu had got them ready. Now, at that time, they sent a messenger to the Muslims, and they said, this is our army. If you want to fight us, you'll be defeated. You can surrender now. You don't have to become a Christian. Just pay jizya, just pay like a tribute to the King of Spain. And of course, Lapu said, I'm never going to pay even a single cent. I'm not going to give you anything. I'm not going to accept. And if you want to fight, we're ready to fight. We've got our swords. They've been hardened by fire. We've got our bamboo spears. You want to fight? Basically, bring it on. So the battle was set. The next day, the Spanish got ready. Now, it was said that there were 60 Spanish. Of course, you know, on one boat, you can't have that many people. So they had a band of 60 warriors. But of course, they had better weapons than the Muslims. Now, the Muslims had 1,500 mujahideen. 1,500 mujahideen against this 60 Spanish. And plus, you know, there might have been a small group of the Raja Humabon, or Carlos, as he changed his name, some of his men. You know, the numbers aren't exact. But the Spanish were sure. They said, we have better weapons. We have armor. You know, they covered their whole body except for their legs in armor. Whereas the Muslims, they had nothing.
They had fire weapons.
They had guns.
As we learned in the previous episodes, numbers are nothing.
Of course, numbers are nothing. But the Christians, they were sure. They had guns, they had swords, they had axes, they had crossbows, they had shields.
And Muslim have bamboo.
And the Muslims had bamboo and swords.
Advanced weaponry, basically.
So they thought, you know, this group of Muslims were going to completely defeat them. This is what they expected. Now, what happened was the Spanish had actually lured the Muslims forward to the shore. And then what they did is they sent a man in secret around the Muslims, and he actually set the houses of the Muslims on fire. He set the houses of the Muslims on fire. Why?
Were they part of the army, or were they just normal citizens?
No, this do you mean the Muslims or the Spanish?
The Spanish, like, they set the Muslim houses on fire?
They set the houses of the Muslims on fire.
Their
because
wives?
they wanted the Muslims to worry about the houses.
A distraction.
They wanted to distract them. So the Muslims would rush back and say, no, our houses, no, I've got everything in there. The Muslims did not budge.
About wives and children.
The wives and children were in the jungle at that point. They were fine. But the houses, the Muslims did not move. The Spanish were amazed.
Opposite, like you know, if we look at Andalus and the battle of and the Poitiers, the battle of Palace of the Shuhada, you see that they looked for a booty, and these Muslims, they didn't even look at their property.
Look at how firm they were. Look at how sure they were that they were going to win this battle. They didn't even care about their houses. The houses can be rebuilt, but their honor will be lost if they don't fight. And so the Spanish were ready. They started to march out. And it said the Muslims, they put themselves into 3 different groups. These 1,500 broke up into 3 groups of 500. And the Spanish said we could hear their cries. We could hear them. We could hear them saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And the Spanish men, the Spanish soldiers, of course, they're in fear. They don't know what to do. You know, it said we were trembling in fear, hearing these men. And it was said that as they came close, the Muslims saw that although they had armor covering most of their body, their legs were uncovered.
With metal.
Their body was covered with metal, but their legs were not covered.
Why?
Because they didn't think that, you know, in the battle, your leg really doesn't get hit. And you can't have that much armor to bring with you. It's going to weigh you down.
It's going to slow you down when you're fighting.
So to get rid of the armor on the legs, they said, no problem. We'll get rid of this. No one cuts you in the leg anyway. What they didn't realize with the Muslims, they actually had poisonous arrows. What they would do is they would get their arrows and they would put poison on them. And so they started to shoot the Spanish in the legs with the poisonous arrows. So the Spanish, you know, they were amazed. All of a sudden they're getting attacked by these arrows. So they started to charge. As they charged, they realized who Magellan was. Because Magellan was the one who was most defended. You know, when you're going in, you know, the king, you can tell who the king is because he's got the most defense. He's got the people around him. The Muslims found out who Magellan was. And the reports from the Spanish said, as soon as they knew who he was, it's as if every single one of them pounced upon him. They pounced upon him. They wanted his blood. This was, the Spanish hadn't even reached the shore yet. They actually fought in the, you know, the shallow water. They were fighting at the edge of the beach, in the water. The Muslims rushed them. As soon as they found Magellan, they set upon him. It was said an arrow was launched, which struck Magellan in his shoulder.
With poison. With poison.
This one, no, it was a heavy arrow. It struck him in the shoulder, through his armor. Someone came upon him and stabbed him in the leg with a knife. As soon as he did this, he fell flat on his face into the water. And it was said the Muslims pounced upon him. They got their spears and their knives, and all you could see was the water red with his blood.
They killed Magellan.
and Magellan was killed.
I've never heard this is the way that Magellan died.
Magellan was killed by the
That's true
Muslims.
that the native people of Philippines they killed Magellan. I didn't know that they are Muslims
And this
They
was
were
a jihad.
Muslims.
This was
You find today, the Filipino nation, which we're going to talk about, how it was founded, exactly why it was founded. They actually regard Lapu-Lapu, as they call him, as a hero. You can go to Mactan Island, you find a statue of Lapu-Lapu, and they call him, the first hero of the Philippines. But we as Muslims, we say, the Philippines is a new country. The Philippines did not exist at the time of Lapu-Lapu. He wasn't a Filipino. What was he?
India.
He was a
Muslim.
Muslim.
Oh yeah, Muslims.
He was a Muslim. He was from the Tausug tribe. He was a proud Muslim. Why did he fight Magellan? Because he was defending Islam. They say because the style of knife that the Muslims have, it's a wavy knife. This is common through Southeast Asia. It's not a straight knife. It's actually wavy. And you see the reason why they do this is once you stab a person, it crushes their bones.
I think this particular dagger or hunger, or however you say it, is called a kris.
A kris. This is the name they call it, the kris. They said Magellan brought his cross, we gave him our kris.
So
He came to bring Christianity, and we defended our land as Muslims.
So if it was widespread at that time, what happened now?
Well, this is what we're going to find out, inshallah.
what happened to the other man who Magellan, he formerly went to associate with? He
This is
went.
very interesting. What had actually happened, Raja Humabon, who had just become Christian, after the battle, many Spanish were killed. But as soon as Magellan was, killed, they said, that's it, we're going to have to retreat. There's no point fighting after this. So they went back, and it was said that the Spanish, being, disbelievers, having really no morals, they actually went back to Raja Humabon, and they started to rape the women. They grabbed some of the women, and they started to rape them. Now, Raja Humabon, he didn't say anything about this, because he knew they have weapons, they have guns. I can't attack them. So he pretended he didn't know about this. And he said to them, look, even though you lost the battle today, I'm still going to have a party for you. Let's have a big dinner. So they had this big dinner, and he poisoned the foods. He's no longer a Christian. So he's no longer a Christian at this point.
They're disunified now.
Yes. Now he's insulted by what they did, so he poisoned their food. They sat down to have dinner, and many of the Spanish were killed. Now this is the first part of the entry of Islam into the Philippines. We're going to go to a very short break, inshallah. So dear viewers, stay tuned and join us in a very short moment.
Our legacy.
Namun surah jangan dimulai semoga itu bangka waibun nagagat dengan kerja sembalan kurang sebuah bulan dua surah yang sebaik Tuanis untuk anak singa betul bangin Rasul Muhammad pasuk sebaik mengharap pasuk bukan mengharap berpasangan bukan mengharap mereka Manila bangin Rasul negeri ini dia tahu bahapin hubungannya akan memang si Rasul selalu kemarin raya kemunun salib aku nak kuno bangkau nak sembahyang ya simpak sembahyangku bangkau nak sembahyang tapakku saja Impang Hindu Allah Subhanahu wa ta'ala Impang Hindu sin agama Islam inut-inut melawan kita yang kudul Islam quwwatan quwwah man nasya'a fil Islam man lam ya'rif amran
Our legacy.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, viewers. We're looking at the Islamic history of the Philippines. Now, as we had mentioned, Islam has entered into the Philippines, and Magellan, the Portuguese explorer, in the name of the King and Queen of Spain, came to try to conquer, or at least establish a Christian foothold in the Philippines. However, the Muslim armies, the proud Muslim armies, led by Khalifa Lapu, the Tausug warrior, defeated him, and Magellan was killed, and the Spanish were defeated. Now, as we mentioned before, the Spanish weren't coming just as mere explorers. They were coming as crusaders. They're coming from Andalus. And they still had the outlook of seeing Muslims as enemies. And they continued having this outlook so much so that they would see the Muslims and they would call them Moro. Because we know Moro was the name that was given to the Muslims in Andalus. So the Muslims of the Philippines, the Spanish called them Moros. Until today, they're actually called Moros, the Muslims. And they call their land Bangsamoro, the land of the Moros, the homeland of the Muslims, or in other words, Bangsamoro. Remember this name, because this is the name of the homeland of the Muslims that have been fighting for 490 years. Every Muslim should know about this, inshallah. Now, it was said that the Christian king of Spain, Carlos, he actually sent an envoy to Lapu-Lapu, Khalifa Lapu, and he said, if you allow us to have the body of Magellan, then we'll give you treasures. Treasures like you could never imagine. Just give us the body of Magellan. What do you think was his response?
Maybe he gave him the head only?
He said, if you were to give me the treasures of the world, you can never have his body. Was it because he had some need for the body? No. But he had pride. He said, I'm not going to submit to some Christian king who sends this man to come kill us. I'm sorry, but this is not going to happen. So you see the situation of the Muslims then. They had pride. They were strong. They had an amazing leader, one of the true heroes of Islam, Khalifa Lapu rahimahullah. Now, if things stayed at that, it would be fine. Magellan has fought, he's been defeated. But of course, the Spanish now, as soon as they've been defeated, they're not going to give up. They want to get their revenge.
Sure, they send other.
So yes, what they did is they sent some Spanish forces 20 years later.
The dinner, about the feast, you said that
Other king.
that he poisoned the food.
Yes, they poisoned the food, and many of the Spanish died, but some of them escaped. Now, after this, they escaped back to Spain.
In a one boat. Only.
In the boat, they went back to Spain, and they gave them the bad news. So the Spanish were devastated, but they didn't give up. 20 years later, in 1543, another Spanish explorer came. His name was Ruy López de Villalobos. Okay.
And the king Lapu-Lapu was still in the crown.
Whether or not it was King Carlos at that time, to be honest, I'm not too sure. This would be interesting to find out. Whether it was Carlos or not isn't too important. But we know they had the same agenda, which was revenge on the Muslims. So they sent Villalobos to go and attack these islands. So they came this time to the east of where Mactan Island was, to the islands of Leyte and Samar. So this is to the east of Mactan Island. And they came and they claimed them in the name of the King of Spain, who now, I'm looking at my notes and I realize was King Philip. He was King Philip II. So what Villalobos did is he actually named the islands on behalf of the king. King Philip, he said this, Las Islas Filipinas, the islands of King Philip. So this is where the name of the Philippines came from. And this stuck until today. The Muslims, they don't accept this. They say, the Philippines is your land. We belong to Bangsamoro.
That's what they call it.
What's the name of it? Let me hear it.
Bangsamoro. Bangsamoro.
Do they call their area that, or do they consider that to all the Philippines?
Anything that is the Muslim land, they call it Bangsamoro. Philippines, because a lot of Muslims in the Philippines, they ask, who is King Philip? Do I belong to King Philip? Why should I call myself a Filipino?
Bangsamoro, you think that word derives from Moro, how they call it?
Yes, as we mentioned, it comes from the name Moro. Bangsa, it means homeland of the Moros or the Muslims. So they will say, I don't belong to King Philip. Filipino means you belong to King Philip. We belong to Allah. We're Moros, we're Muslims.
And how they allow the name to stuck in the time?
Once the Spanish began to conquer, the name stuck. The Muslims never accepted this. Until today, they say, we're not Filipinos. We're Muslims. We have our own nation. You crusaders, you came and you tried to kill us. You tried to attack us. And it's been going for 490 years now. We are Muslims. We're not Filipinos. So 12 years later, in 1565, another Spanish explorer, his name was Miguel López de Legazpi. There's a city in the Philippines, Legazpi City, named after him today. He actually started building the first Spanish settlements in Cebu, which was just across from Mactan Island, where Magellan was killed. Now, Legazpi, he was actually originally fought off. The Muslims, they started to fight him. But by that time, Khalifa Lapu, he was no longer Either he wasn't alive or he'd gone back to Mindanao. So they tried to fight them off, but there wasn't much of a problem. Now what happened was Legazpi, he actually came to another ruler who was a polytheist, an idol worshipper. His name was Sikatuna, and he was from a place called Bohol, which is just, I believe it's to the south of Cebu.
So
Now,
with all these Spanish conquests coming and coming, they fought them off, and it still remained Muslim majority up until this time, or
where there were Muslims, they were fought. Where there were non-Muslims, they didn't have problems. Like as we said, Legazpi, he came and he found Sikatuna. Sikatuna was, he was a non-Muslim. So what they did is they said, let us make an alliance to fight the Muslims together.
The same deal.
Now what do you think they did for their alliance?
They drink the wine.
They made the sandugo. They made the blood pact. They got the wine, they cut themselves, they bled into the cup, and they drank it together. So you see, even the foundation of this alliance, it's something barbaric.
So bloody.
It's something that's really foreign to a Muslim to understand how this could happen. But this was the mentality of the Spanish Crusaders.
Yeah, because they love blood. They killed Muslims in Spain.
No.
They were killing Muslims in Spain.
Indeed. And this is, really crazy to see. Now, what happened was the next year, these two allies, they sailed to Cebu and they attacked, there was a leader at that time, also a non-Muslim. Because we know Cebu at that time wasn't fully Muslim. Only Mactan Island was. Most of the middle of the Philippines wasn't yet Muslim. You had Manila in the north, which was Muslim. You had Mindanao in the south that was Muslim. But the islands in the middle hadn't all become Muslim.
So these conquests that were coming, did the Muslims in the south try to bring Islam to the northern parts of Philippines, or did they stay in their area?
This is what was happening. But then when the Spanish came into the middle, it made things difficult. Once the Spanish started fighting, it created a problem for the da'wah.
So now Spain has sent a second army, and they have a good army. So they've conquered one island already.
Yes, they've taken a few islands now.
A few islands.
Now he's just made an alliance with Raja Tupas. Raja Tupas from Cebu. Now what they did is they went to remember we mentioned Raja Humabon, the one who poisoned the Spanish? They came to his nephew, and they came to his nephew, and they actually said to him, become Christian, otherwise we're going to fight you. He realized, I'm outnumbered, so he was baptized, and they named the town Villa Santissimo Nombre de Jesus, the town of the most holy name of Jesus.
Why don't they learn about why don't they look at their past? As you said, history repeats itself.
This is the past, and this is, part of the message that we want to say to them. Look at your past. Look at how the Muslims were the noble warriors. Look at how the native Indians, the polytheists, how they sold themselves to the Spanish, who were really barbaric crusaders. And this is the message that the people want to give to the Filipinos today.
So maybe if the Spanish conquests didn't keep coming back, the South can have a strong enough army to finally take over, but they kept having to
Islam naturally was spreading throughout the Philippines. They took Manila. It would have spread to all of the Philippines if the Spanish didn't come.
Sheikh Musa, what about other Muslims in other countries?
Maybe Malaysia or Indonesia.
Khalifa or any other mujahideen from anywhere, there is not any help?
Unfortunately, as we're going to see in Southeast Asia, when Islam first came, because it didn't come by force. When Islam comes by force, you've got order. But when it progresses slowly through da'wah, you're not going to have big empires. They're going to be very disunited. This is one of the problems that the Muslims in Southeast Asia faced early on. Because Islam was spread by da'wah, it was never consolidated properly. You'd have an island Muslim, an island non-Muslim. And you're always going to have problems. It's hard to unite when this happens. So what happened was we see the Spanish in this new town that they had made, they made this a base. This was the base of the Crusaders. And all of their attacks were based from here.
So what are the other Muslims in the other islands doing now? They're preparing?
Now we see Mindanao isn't being touched. The south isn't being touched. But the Spanish heard about a city called Manila. It used to be called Maynila. Okay, now there's a common misconception. A lot of people say Manila. It actually used to be called Amanila. From Arabic. Amanila. This is a common misconception. It's not actually true. It was ruled by a Muslim, Raja Sulaiman. But it was actually named Maynila, which it's named after a mangrove tree. Nothing too amazing.
Yeah.
But the Spanish heard about Manila. It was a very prosperous city. So they said, okay, this is the city we're going to attack.
And that was the capital before also.
It became the capital later on. It's the capital of the Philippines today. So this was a Muslim city. The Spanish heard about this because they started to ask, the native Indians, what are the good cities to take? So they said Manila is that's the main city. So the Spanish decided that they're going to attack. Now, what they did is they came there, and the ruler, his name was Raja Sulaiman. When they first came, the Spanish said, we want to just come, take a look around, maybe have some trade. Their true intention was to attack. But they came to Raja Sulaiman and said, no, we come in peace. We're just passing through. We just want to take a look. So he said, no problem. We'll write a peace treaty that both of us agree. You're here to just take a look around. We'll respect your rights, and we're not going to fight each other. Of course not. The Spanish said, no problem. So they signed this peace treaty, knowing that their true intention was actually to attack. Now, once they had signed that peace treaty, more and more Spanish started to come, until they came to Raja Sulaiman. They said, look, this peace treaty that we signed with you, forget about it. Give us your land.
As I said to Muslims in Granada, when they wrote the peace contract with Abu Abdullah Muhammad, they also broke this contract.
Yes, you see, this is from their etiquette, from their lack of morals.
Why would the Muslims believe that treaty if they kept trying to come for all those years? Why would they believe this?
Raja Sulaiman hadn't met any Christians before. He didn't know who these people were. Had he known how conniving they were, of course he wouldn't have agreed.
And what he do? He not prepared for any war.
Yeah.
So the Christians from Spain, they basically signed the peace treaty and they waited until there were enough so they could pounce.
Then they said, give us the city. So Raja Sulaiman, what did he say? What do you think he said?
No.
I will fight with you.
He said, if you want to take the city, we will fight. And so you had the Battle of Manila. The Battle of Manila happened in June in 1570. Now what happened was, Raja Sulaiman, he knew that his forces aren't going to be strong enough. He looked at the Christians. He knew that they had weapons, that he didn't have. So he was forced to make an alliance with a non-Muslim. His name was Raja Lakandula. So he was a non-Muslim. He was, a polytheist, an idol worshipper. But he had no choice. There were no other Muslims in Manila or around that area. The Muslims in Mindanao, he didn't have time to contact them. So he was forced to unite with Raja Lakandula. Now what happened was they were defeated. They were being defeated, and Raja Sulaiman said, look, we can't continue fighting. So they said, we're going to leave it at this. Now what happened was Raja Lakandula, straight away, he said, that's it, I've been defeated. You want me to become a Christian? I'll become a Christian. So he was baptized and he became a Christian.
A Muslim.
Raja Sulaiman, of course, he's never going to leave his religion. No way he was going to leave his religion.
And what he do?
What happened was, first Raja Lakandula, he became a Christian. And so the Christians, they said to him, okay, now that you've joined us, you can have this part of Manila. As for Raja Sulaiman, you don't get anything. Trying to give him an incentive to become Muslim. But he refused. Now in 1571, the history mentions someone named Tariq Sulaiman. Some people say this is Raja Sulaiman. Some people say maybe it's another ruler who had a similar name. Most likely it's him, meaning Raja Sulaiman's first name was Tariq. What had happened was he actually, his tribe, they were called the Makabebe, and they were in Manila. What happened was he refused to submit. He said, I'm not going to become a Christian. I'm not going to join you. Rather, I'm going to fight you. And so they fought again. Now this was the battle, it was called the Battle of Bangkusay. This was also fought in Manila. Now Sulaiman's forces, they fought very valiantly. They fought this battle against the Spanish. However, they were defeated, and they were defeated completely. Raja Sulaiman, rahimahullah, he was actually killed in this battle. And the Spanish were victorious.
And Manila now all is Christian.
It's Christian. So what happened was, Raja Lakandula, the one who became Christian, he ruled a part of Manila, and the Spanish ruled the other part of Manila.
So now are there any more islands left that are left to conquer now?
Well, they've got the main city of Manila. They've got parts of Cebu. So they're conquering the top 2/3 of the Philippines. Of course, the third part is Mindanao. Now it's interesting to see, again, looking at the Spanish, how conniving they are. Remember they said to Raja Lakandula, you become Christian, this is your land. What do you think happened after 5 years? They said, we're sorry, but you don't own this land anymore. We change our mind, it's now ours.
So the contract.
The Muslims, when they defeat, they give them basically the option of keeping their religion. The Spanish basically forced them to become Christians. So, and after all, they kept conquering, almost all the Philippines became Christian.
They'd coerce them to become Christian. They'd trick them into becoming Christian, and then they'd actually betray them, as we saw. Raja Lakandula, this is a treaty, we sign it. Just rip up the treaty and say, you've got a problem, you want to fight us?
As treaties before.
Yeah, you're a Christian. The church says you can't fight against us.
They're bullies.
Very, very big bullies. And they knew that they could get away with it. Because they saw, especially the Indian, the native Filipinos, they were very primitive. They weren't able to fight back against the Spanish.
Vulnerable.
Did any of them go back to Islam after they found out that they've been tricked by them, or they just?
These people were not Muslims. Okay. They were not. These were polytheists, idol worshippers. Okay. The Muslims never embraced Islam. They never. They were too. How can you leave Islam for kufr? How can you leave Islam for idol worship or all of this nonsense? It was only the polytheists that embraced Islam, polytheists that embraced Christianity. Sorry. Now what had happened was, as soon as they said the Raja Lakandula, you don't own any of this anymore, understandably he fought against them again, and he united with another Muslim ruler who was around that area, and they fought, and yeah, again they were defeated. So Manila was under complete control. All of Luzon eventually came under the control of the Spanish. Now at that time, the Spanish, they started to spread, converting all of the native tribes, but they never were able to penetrate into Mindanao. Mindanao, as we said, was the southern islands, which at one point it was 100% Muslim. The Muslims actually conquered all of this. Now what had happened was you had three Muslim sultanates. You had the Sultanate of Sulu. This covered Sulu, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi. This is the area closest to Malaysia. Then you had the Sultanate of Maguindanao. Now Maguindanao is actually where the name of Mindanao comes from. And then you had the Sultanate of the Maranao. These were the three Muslim sultanates, and they ruled over all of Mindanao. The Spanish could never get into Mindanao.
Why didn't the southern help the other guys?
The what, sorry?
The southern people. Why didn't they help the other ones?
As we said, they were very cut off at that time. The Philippines is a large group of islands. It'll take weeks. If you want to sail from Mindanao all the way to Manila, it might take weeks or months. You can't just go sail quickly and, it's hard to know the news of exactly what's going on. So the Muslims in Mindanao weren't aware of a lot of what's going on in Manila. And even then, they might not have had the manpower to send other Muslims to actually go and fight them, and they never received a request from the Muslims in Manila or Cebu or any of the places like this.
So Spanish never penetrated to the south?
It took a while. They did enter into Mindanao, but they saw the Muslims, and they realized we're not going to be able to take this place.
But it seems like basically they took over the two northern islands, right? So basically, maybe if they got all the polytheists who became Christians, would that outnumber the Muslims in the south? Like, would that mean?
It had nothing to do with numbers. In the end, it was about the ferocity of the Muslims. They would never, they were too afraid to fight the Muslims. Because there was a large number. You can't bring, a massive army into Mindanao. It's going to take too much manpower. So they made peace treaties with the Muslims. They were never able to, properly penetrate Mindanao.
Did the Christian history say that they conquered all the Philippines?
No, they never conquered all of the Philippines. There were battles. I mean, especially on the eastern coast of Mindanao, there were battles with the Muslims. The Spanish fought, but they were never able to actually get a proper hold upon Mindanao. So this was the situation. It continued for 200 years. 200 years of the Spanish consolidating their power in the north, fighting the Muslims in Mindanao.
And they can't go.
They can't?
They can't conquer.
They could not conquer them. Mindanao remained independent for 200 years under these sultanates. The Sultanate of Sulu, who were the Tausogs, the Sultanate of Maguindanao, and the Sultanate of the Maranao. So this was the status quo, 200 years of fighting. Now, this ended around the year 1762, when Great Britain actually invaded the Philippines because of the war that they were having with the Spanish. So this started to change the situation. What we're going to do, inshallah, we're going to go to a very quick break, and we're going to resume in looking at the situation of now Great Britain, a new enemy, entering into Mindanao. So dear viewers, stay tuned. We'll be back in a short moment, and we hope to see you then.
Our legacy.
Allah the Almighty has said, O son of Adam, so long as you call upon me and ask of me, I shall forgive you for what you have done, and I shall not mind. O son of Adam, were your sins to reach the clouds of the sky, and were you then to ask forgiveness of me, I would forgive you.
قل لباغ نال منه مشرعا فينا مداه هل يضر الشمس شيئا أقزم تبت يداه أقزم تبت يداه عارفوه يا عداه كلنا اليوم فداه واسمعوا نبض قلوبي يبلغ الكرنا صداه عارفوه يا عداه كلنا اليوم فداه واسمعوا نبض قلوبي يبلغ الكون صداه كل باغ نال منه مشرعا فينا هداه هل يضر الشمس شيئا أقزم تبت يداه أقزم تبت يداه ويح قوم ألو من عزيز شاد مجدا وشداه ويح
Our legacy.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the episode, viewers, where we're looking at the history of Islam in the Philippines. So as we said, the Spanish were conquering most of the north and the central parts of the Philippines, but they were never able to fully penetrate the south. Now what had happened was Spain was actually at war with the UK, with England. And England had actually beaten the Spanish. So in turn, they gained all of the Spanish possessions, one of which was the Philippines. So from the year 1762 until 1764, only 2 years, the UK actually was in war with the Muslims of Mindanao.
The UK didn't come to Spanish aid. It didn't come to the Spanish
No, they were
aid.
fighting the Spanish.
Oh, they were fighting.
It's more so the battle of the imperialistic forces of the world at that time.
Yeah, and once the Spanish won, they got the Philippines. So they were then fighting against the Muslims. Now, the British didn't really fight the Muslims too much, but nonetheless, they were at war with the Muslims. And of course, they weren't able to defeat the Muslims. Now, what had happened was after 2 years, the Spanish got power back. Now, this continued. I mean, it just kept on going on and on up until 1896. 1896 was the year of the Philippine Revolution. You know, when the native people, who by that time were almost completely Christian, and you go to Philippines today, it was for a long time the only Christian country in all of Asia. Now the second one, as we know, is East Timor. So it's a very large Catholic country. They, abandoned their idol worship, and the majority of them became Catholic. They joined the Spanish. That's why a majority of them, you see, they've got Spanish names, a lot of Spanish culture, even though they're in Asia. Now 1896 was the Philippine Revolution. Now at this time, the Americans were at war with the Spanish. And so the Americans actually gained possession of the Philippines. So the Americans, they had a different strategy in fighting the Muslims. They had no mercy. What they would do is they would push through to the islands and they would build a base. The Spanish did this, but they never actually ventured out. Whereas the Americans would build a base and they had no mercy for the Muslims. They would come in and they would fight against the Muslims. And it was said that when they fought against the Muslims, the guns that they had, even though they were big, powerful rifles, it wasn't enough against the Muslims, because they'd shoot a Muslim, and the Muslim would keep on charging at them. So the general of the army at that time, he wrote back and said, give us bigger guns. These models, they're not normal people. We shoot them and they just keep on coming. It's amazing. Now, there was a very famous battle that took place in, you've got the island of Sulu. Sulu is where the Tausugs are. And there was a volcano, a crater of a volcano. It's called Budaho. Now, what happened in Budaho is truly a tragedy. The Muslims who refused to submit to American rule actually went to the top of this mountain and were hiding, protecting themselves inside the crater of the volcano. Now, you had women, children, and men, of course. The Americans came up and they received an order from their general to kill every man, woman, and child. This is called the massacre of Budaho.
Like Ashab al-Ukhdud.
This was, yes, they were killed, and you see photos of it. We have photos of it. The Americans celebrated thousands of dead Muslims, unarmed, the majority of them, in this crater. The president of the USA, Woodrow Wilson, congratulated them on this massacre. And many Americans, like Mark Twain, he actually said this is not something to be proud of. And he wrote really much against this, against American imperialism. He said, is this what we're fighting for? To kill the natives, the innocents? So this was called the Buddaho massacre. Now the Americans, they kept on going. They still kept on fighting the Muslims. And even though they were fighting them, they had a respect for them. You had, his name eludes me at the moment, he was called the General of the US Army. You've got the normal rank of general, then you've got a rank that only one person in American history has had, the General of the Muslim Army. Meaning he was the highest ranked American soldier in history. He said these brave Muslim warriors, once they got onto the battlefield, it's like they're crazed. They think of nothing but death. They will not give up until they have given their life for their religion. He said, I've never seen anyone like them. Subhanallah. So the Americans continued fighting them until they withdrew. They could never fully conquer the Muslims. And they actually gave the Muslims the name, the unconquerable Mohammedans. Of course, Mohammedan meaning a Muslim.
For this 490 years, Muslims haven't been ever conquered.
Never conquered.
Until now.
Military conquered, they couldn't be conquered. Until now, they're still fighting. Until now, 490 years, the unconquerable Muslims of Mindanao. Subhanallah, these are our brothers and sisters. And yes, sisters, up until now you will find that even when they're short on manpower, women will fight. I've met women who are with the Mujahideen in the Philippines. They would fight. They're more men than some of the men you would find. Subhanallah. Now, once the Americans withdrew, now you had the Philippines fighting the Muslims, the Filipinos, the native, Filipinos fighting against the Moros. Now, things had sort of died down for a little while. They sort of said to the Muslims, look, keep your things and let's just be friendly. We don't want to fight too much. However, what had happened was the Muslims, at that time, the Sultanate of Sulu, they used to actually control a large part of Sabah. Sabah is in Borneo in Malaysia. It was granted to the Sultan of Sulu from the Sultan of Borneo a long time ago. So when the Philippines got independence, the Filipino government said, well, we should claim Sabah as well, since it's part of the Sultanate of Sulu. Even though we can't conquer them, we're going to claim their lands. But Malaysia also claimed independence, from the British. And Malaysia said, no, Sabah is ours, all of it. So there was a bit of a misunderstanding between the Filipinos and the Malaysians over who owned Sabah. In reality, it was the Muslims of Mindanao. But they were both fighting over this.
Did the Muslims of Mindanao just want to be their own separate nation, or what side did they want to go to?
They considered themselves their own separate nation. They never submitted. They never actually...
Malaysia was Muslims.
Malaysia, you find Borneo and Sabah is majority not Muslim, unfortunately. But the rest of Malaysia is. Malaysia is about 62%.
So this part of Malaysia, this part Sabah in Borneo, was a part of Sulu.
It was a part of the Sultanate of Sulu. Now, what happened was the Filipino government came up with a plan to conquer Sabah in the name of the Philippines. Now, what had happened is they got 200 or 300 Muslims from, remember we said Tawi-Tawi? They took them from around Tawi-Tawi. And they took them to an island near Manila called Corregidor. And they trained them. They didn't tell them what their mission was. They trained them. And then once they were fully trained, they said to them, your mission is to invade Sabah in the name of the Philippines. Now, these are Muslims. They said, we're sorry, but we're not going to invade a Muslim land. We've got relatives there. And so the Filipino government realized the mistake they'd made. And they thought, well, we can't send them back to Tawi-Tawi. So they killed them all. They killed them all. But one, Qadar Allah, one of them survived. Subhanallah, it's amazing. Allah allowed one of them to survive. He escaped from the island. He swam to the shore. He went back to Mindanao and he told the people what had happened. 200 to 300 innocent Muslims killed in what was known as the Jabida massacre. How foolhardy and tactless was the Filipino government? You can imagine the fuss this caused. So this caused the Muslims of Mindanao to stand up and say, where are our rights? We're sick of being treated as second-class citizens. We are Muslims, we are Moros, and we are proud. And so the what we call the Bangsa Moro Jihad, it started again. You had a professor in the University of Manila. His name was Nur Miswari. He's a Muslim at Tausug. And he began to unite the Muslims. All of them. He said, let us fight for our freedom. And he started the Bangsa Moro Jihad. And Alhamdulillah, the Muslims, they began to fight for their freedom. And the Filipinos, they couldn't match them. Because as we said, the Muslims, especially the Tawzugs, they were brave, fierce warriors. So they said, look, have autonomy. Have autonomy. You can rule yourself, but you can't have independence. So the Muslims said, Tayyib, we'll take autonomy. Now by this point, things look optimistic. But as we saw in Andalus, as we saw in Sicily, division started to become a fitna. Because what was called the Moro National Liberation Front split into two groups. The Moro National Liberation Front and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. One dominated by one group, one dominated by another ethnic group. And then they split again into a third group who became known as Abu Sayyaf. It was founded by a man named Jinjalani. He was a veteran from Afghanistan. Now what had happened, you had these three groups. They started to not fight against one another, but each one wanting to claim land in their name. And this was it's a big fitna that continues until now. So we're getting to the modern day at the moment in Bangsamoro, in the southern Philippines.
So it seems like, unlike Andalus, Philippines, it took much longer time for them to finally split. Like it seems they were more united in the beginning.
One of the main things was because Mindanao was never fully, invaded by the non-Muslims. There was never a need to unite, so they could sort of be part of different ethnic groups, but they never had the fitna. Now, in modern-day Philippines, you do have this fitna. Now, alhamdulillah, in the recent years, you have had, a lot of changes. The Moro National Liberation Front, led by Noor Ismari, is, uniting the Muslims for a large part. But at least we leave it here because we're running out of time. The least we can say is this is the history of Islam in Bangsamoro, in the Philippines. These are our brothers and our sisters. This is our legacy, and we feel their pain. 490 years, it's enough.
They are minority, but they know, as Allah said in the Quran, how is the small group
conquered by the permission of Allah, no doubt. These are our brothers. The least we can do is remember them in our dua. So may Allah support the Muslims of Bangsamoro, grant them victory and grant them patience, and may Allah reward all of you. I hope that you benefited from this show, and I hope you, the viewers, benefited from this show as much as we did. Don't forget us and the Muslims of Bangsamoro in your dua. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يكون نأوى الله عن ساح الدنايا وعن سلع المفاسد والمجون سبيل الله درب للمنايا وأخطار تجلل بالفتون سبيل الله غاية كل حي لبيب عاقل شهم أمين